You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Gerry Dick. In June, many years ago, right, Gerry?
That's right. Many years ago. That's right.
In June 2000, broadcast news veteran Gerry Dick and technology entrepreneur Scott Jones formed Grow Indiana Media Ventures, LLC. It's a media company created to deliver Indiana business news and information through multiple media sources. Mr. Dick is president, managing editor, and owner of the company. But I first, as many people did, saw him during his 14 years at WRTV, a local television. And prior to the creation of Grow Indiana Media Ventures with its flagship presentation known as Inside Indiana Business, Gerry served as senior vice president of the Indianapolis Economic Development Corporation. Gerry Dick, I get to ask you questions the first time ever.
I know, I'm nervous. I'm not used to being on this side of the mic, you know?
Well, I promise to treat you as gracefully as you've always treated me when I've been on your show. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Robert. Happy to do it.
Well, and one of the things I want to make sure we get to is your Business and Beyond podcast, because it's amazing how many of the same guests that we've actually had.
Right.
And you do a terrific job with it. But your Hoosier roots run deep. Born and bred. Tell me what it was like to grow up as an Indiana kid.
Great. You know, I'm unique, I guess you could say, in the broadcasting business, because typically in broadcasting, you've got to move away and you go away and maybe to other states or wherever the case might be. But it's interesting. I've never worked outside of the state of Indiana in my professional career. So born and raised here, born in Clinton, Indiana, which is in not Clinton County. A lot of people will confuse that when I tell them where I'm from. But Clinton, Indiana, Vermilion County, far western part of the state, about 15 miles north of Terre Haute. A great town to grow up in, would not trade it for anything in the world. Just a wonderful community. Had a great childhood. Everything. I mean, I've been blessed to be sure. And being from Indiana is a really good thing. And I really do mean it when I talk about Indiana being a great place to raise a family, to grow a business, quality of life, all those things. I really believe it. I've lived it. Many other people have as well. And I think it's very true. And I think it's one of the reasons, or among the reasons, that Indiana is enjoying some success from an economic development standpoint too.
Who would be some of your top Hoosier homers? Those who wave the banner of the Hoosier State as loudly and proudly and as often as anyone.
Yeah,
I will nominate one person, and I will ask you for a few more, and that would be our friend Bill Benner.
Yeah, that's a great one. Bill, absolutely, from the sports standpoint, but he extends it well beyond that, and his his institutional knowledge is so great, and he's lived it and witnessed it and experienced it. So he would be a great one. Another one that's, I think, an obvious, another mutual friend is Mitch Daniels. I think Mitch, in his role at Purdue, what he has done there, obviously previously what he did as governor of the state, his impact in D.C. He's had impact everywhere he's gone. And, even though he wasn't technically born here, certainly he was raised here, and he speaks, I think, to so much of what is good about Indiana. I'll throw another one out there as well, and that's Jim Schellinger, who recently stepped down as Secretary of Commerce, and he will talk. You sit down with him, he will talk at length about the virtues, the wonderful things about the state of Indiana. So those would be some off the top of my head I'd throw out there.
Jim Schellinger is one of the best, if not the best, cheerleader for the state. Mm-hmm. What a terrific, terrific guy. A great family as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that love for Indiana and what the state is all about and what it can become, I think really helped him achieve great success at the IEDC, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, and the Secretary of Commerce in selling Indiana, not just here in the Midwest or in the U.S., but around the globe as well.
So I'm going to ask you maybe a little bit tougher question. Who would you put as maybe our 2 or 3 most impactful Hoosier exports?
Exports. Okay. So folks who maybe grew up here, who left. That's a great question. I mean, some of the obvious ones, you point to are the David Lettermans and the Jane Pauleys and those folks who've had an impact on media. Some of the lesser known people who have left the state. Angela Ahrens went to Ball State University, New Palestine native, small town girl, grew up, Ball State graduate. Went on to become the CEO of Burberry. She's then on to be the number 2 or 3 person at Apple. Just a phenomenal, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know about her, but that's an example of the kind of talent, the quality that comes from Indiana. We need to keep more of them in the state, but you can't keep them all in the state. You can toss around people who've made a mark. Folks like Mark Cuban, leaving Indiana University and going on to his high profile situations in many scenarios. Don Mattingly, who's had such an impact, an Evansville native. I actually played baseball against him, American Legion baseball.
How'd you do?
I struck him out twice.
Does he know?
I doubt it. It was his first. It was my last year in Legion ball. His first year, he played for a team, Evansville Funkhauser, which was a phenomenal team. I'm telling you, really a good team. And I do remember that because he was known even back then as quite a player. But the impact that he's had on baseball, on the sport of baseball, and is also given back to Evansville and Southwest Indiana. So I know there are many others.
David Lee Roth.
Well, there you go. Yeah, was he Lafayette?
He's born in Bloomington. Okay.
And
Axl Rose.
That's Lafayette, I believe. That's Lafayette. That's who I'm thinking of.
John Wooden.
Yeah. You
don't get John Wooden and Axl Rose in the same sentence very often.
Same conversation. No, that's right.
You graduated from Indiana State. What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1981. Yeah.
So you were there as a student
when Larry Bird was there.
Exactly.
Which was
that like?
It was phenomenal. I'm telling you, it was. I'm a big sports nut. Enjoy sports. Love to play it. And it was a magical time to be at Indiana State. And my path there, it's funny how things work out. I originally went to DePaul, and was going to play football and baseball there. Got mononucleosis as I showed up my freshman year for football camp, and then got a reaction to mono. And I was in the hospital. I mean, I had like 104-degree temperature and packed in ice, and missed the first 3 weeks of school, and, really should not have gone to school, should have laid out, but I wanted to get to school and all that kind of stuff. So my academic performance, shall we say, at DePaul was not good. And it was just great school. It was just not a good experience. But just a twist of fate, I somehow got an internship at the ABC TV station in Terre Haute, a 1-month deal. DePaul had what they called a winter term. And I got a job, a 1-month job as an intern, and thought this might be something I want to do. And I'd never even thought about it. I thought I wanted to be a high school basketball coach. And anyway, that kind of turned me on to the whole news, journalism business, transferred to Indiana State, majored in radio, TV, film, and then had that great experience with, it was interesting back then, you in like a 5-year span, you had Larry Bird in basketball, you had Kurt Thomas, the Olympic gymnast, and Bruce Baumgartner, the Olympic wrestler, all went to Indiana State during that time. So it was a good time to be there.
Do you remember seeing, Bird's travels from French Lick, he goes to Bloomington. I think he lasts, a few weeks?
Yeah, not long, yeah.
And then he sits out for like maybe a year, and then he matriculates to Indiana State, mostly because the coach, Hodges, I believe was the coach's name.
Bill Hodges kept at him. He knew he had recruited him before he committed to IU, knew he was down in French Lick, and he deserves the credit for him going there because he didn't give up. He went down literally, as I understand it, when Larry was on the garbage truck.
That's right.
And recruited him back to Terre Haute. And the rest, as they say, is history. But it truly was magical, that whole experience. And back then, 78, 79, the Final Four and the tournament was really just beginning to come into that status or that stratosphere on the national stage. And NBC had the contract, and it was Dick Enberg was the play-by-play guy. Billy Packer and Al McGuire were the two color guys. Al McGuire loved Larry Bird, loved Indiana State. Billy Packer, he was very suspicious. He didn't think Bird was that good. He thought he was overrated. And they had a little back and forth going, and the students loved it. It was just a fun time to be there.
And isn't that the 1979 NCAA championship game, which Indiana State, I think, lost by like maybe 12? It was like 63-51 or something like that.
That sounds about right, yeah.
That is still the highest rated college basketball game in history. Still. I
think it is. It certainly was until recently, and I think it still may be. You hear that talked about a lot. And it was, like I said, I use the word magical. It's hard to put into words what that was like for a smaller school like Indiana State that was, suddenly thrust on the national spotlight, and to be on that stage and Bird and Magic and that whole thing was just very cool.
Well, and just 3 years before, IU, Indiana University, goes undefeated, 32-0. I forget what Indiana State's record was going into the title game. It might have been 30.
Oh, it was they were undefeated.
I know that, but I wasn't sure how many games that they had won.
I think it was. It seems to me it was 33, maybe 33. No, 32-0. I can't remember. Yeah.
But just to have a little school like that, the electricity when you're walking around campus. Do you remember? Did you have any classes with Larry Bird? He was so shy. Do you remember having any conversations?
He was
with him?
No, very brief. I'd see him every now and then. My library was called the Ballyhoo Tavern. That was so I'd see him in the Ballyhoo every now and then. That was the big hot spot on campus, the Ballyhoo and Semrels. And I once in a long while would see him there. Never really had any conversations with him, but it was one of those teams too that everyone was a role player. You had Larry, who was the superstar, but he made everybody on that team better. And you had Brad Miley from Mooresville. But Brad Miley was an Indiana kid. You had Bob Heaton from Clay City, little Clay City. Indiana guys, and it was just a neat team to watch come together. And the campus was electric. We used to have at Holman Center, I don't know if they still do, it was festival seating, I guess you'd say. You get in free with your student ID, and it was first in, first come, first serve. So we would eat at the fraternity house. We'd eat dinner early, then we'd go down and wait in line, and the doors would open, and you would just fly in there to get your seats. So that was, Holman Center was packed every game, and it was pretty cool.
You mentioned DePaul a few minutes ago. Is that where you met Ken Owen? Did you meet there? I know how good friends you are.
You know what? That's very interesting. I don't think I'm sure we did cross paths there, but we really met a few years later in Fort Wayne when he was at the CBS station in Fort Wayne. So I'm a year or maybe 2 years older than Ken. And Ken, I got my first job out of college was at the NBC station. And Ken was there in Fort Wayne on his job at Wayne TV. So that's where we first connected. And then, of course, he moved down to Indianapolis as I did and continued the friendship. Great guy, really good guy.
One question I wanted to ask you, since we're talking about Larry Bird, and I don't know how many people you've interviewed in your career. It's got to be in the thousands. Have you had a chance to talk with Larry about, hey, I was there and kind of reminisce a bit?
It's funny. I have, and he's a man of few words. So he appreciated it. We had him in on the show. It's been a few years ago. And so I talked a little bit about that. So he acknowledged it, but didn't elaborate much.
He doesn't appear to be too sentimental.
Yeah, right. Great player though, great and good guy. And what a cool story his is. I still love watching on YouTube Larry Bird videos from his days.
They're great.
Not only at the Celtics, not only at Indiana State, but from the Celtics, and just how his court sense, and like he had eyes in the back of his head, and some of his passes.
Plus, when Michael Jordan says you're the best trash talker he ever encountered during his career.
Yeah, that's a compliment. Yeah.
It's being anointed by the Pope, right? Which would be harder for you to recognize, thinking back today about how the news media and technology was when you started, or when you started having someone say, this is the way it's going to be in 40 years?
Oh, that's a great question. Probably someone telling me back then the way it would be 40 years from now, because, and you understand this as well. I think back on that, and, when I started in television news, there weren't computers. There was no internet. We had just those clunky typewriters that we had to pound stories out on, and a thing called a telephone. That was not a cellular telephone or a cell or a mobile. It was a wired telephone that you had to, if you're out on a story and you need to get a hold of a contact, you had to make sure you had change in your pocket so you get to a phone booth, which essentially don't exist anymore. So I think back on those days, and I have really mixed thoughts about it, because I think on the one hand, technology today is so awesome, and it allows for the dissemination of content and news and information, and the ability to get things quickly and to allow reporters to do their jobs. I think those are all positives, but I think it's also a source of, as we see, source of a lot of misinformation. And, people, get, in a rush to get things out there, get the wrong information and the wrong content out there. And I also think that having notepads and having to call people on the phone and set up interviews or get information, all those types of things, it was more difficult, more time consuming, more clunky, if you will, less efficient. But I think there was a lot of positives about it too, from a relationship building standpoint, and getting that information and making sure it's correct and making sure it's right. So kind of mixed emotions. I think on balance, though, technology is a good thing. It enables us to do our jobs in the way we do it now wouldn't be able to do it otherwise without technology and the ability to do that. But a much different day back in the day in the old school reporting ways.
The media takes its fair share of hits, sometimes from Republicans like me, and sometimes from groups who feel that they've been mistreated or misrepresented. If you were on a panel, and I know you've moderated scores and scores of panels, but if you were sitting there, how would you defend, in general terms, the job and the performance of the news media in 2021 or just in the 21st century, because taking into account how much technology has changed things?
Yeah. Great question. I'll be really honest. I'm on the one hand, a defender of reporters and journalists and those doing their jobs. But on the other hand, and I think this is more directed on the national stage, and when I see covered nationally on the networks, on cable, and all the different various sources we have to look, I just think reporting has taken a turn for the worse. I mean, I really do. I think opinion has integrated itself into reporting. It's great to have opinion, and that's one thing. Then there's straight journalism. That's another. The two are separate. Now today it's very difficult to see the difference. It's you used to see that in certain instances, maybe on outlets that were more right leaning or left leaning, whatever the case might be. But now on what's termed mainstream media or legacy media, whatever you want to call it, so much I think comes off as opinion as opposed to straight reporting, and I think that's a bad thing, and I think it paints everyone in the industry, including local reporters and local journalists, who I think those that I know, it can be a difficult job and a challenging job. They really try to do a really good job about informing people and getting information, getting content out there, but it paints everybody in the industry with a broad, bad brush. So I don't know that I can necessarily I can't defend some of the bad stuff that I see going on, but it's really, frankly, to me, it's disheartening because I know, and I always said, I never wanted to be one of those guys to say, when I started, when I was in the business. But I'm telling you, it was different. I mean, the attention and the focus on facts and content being correct first and foremost was there. I mean, if you had, now I see things that are reports that are just flat out wrong. I mean, totally wrong. And what happens? I mean, it just kind of goes by the wayside and you're on to the next story and it goes. I know, and believe me, I made mistakes, and everybody does. And I was mortified when I would make a mistake or an error, be it whether it's something like grammar, let alone content. I was mortified by that. And I don't know, for some people it's still that way, I think, but I don't know about the broader industry. So it's much different than it was, that's for sure.
Who were some of the broadcast journalists, either on the national or local level, whom you looked up to or said, if I'm half as good as he or she is, then I'm going to be pretty darn good? Yeah,
that's interesting, Robert. I think back, and this goes way back, and some of these names may be not familiar to some listeners, but there was a CBS. He's a White House reporter for a long time. Bill Plant was a, kind of meat and potatoes newsman. Dan Rather, now his is much more the opinion guy these days, obviously. But back in the day when he was a reporter, I remember as a kid, that might have been when I started getting interested in journalism, was the Democrat convention in 1968 in Chicago. And the violence and all the stuff going on, and obviously the unrest we saw in the wake of the assassination of Dr. King and all those types of things, and the news coverage of that. I was fascinated by that. I looked at that and I saw those people out there doing those stories and bringing these stories from far away into our living room, I thought was neat. So I thought rather read his book. I think it was The Camera Never Blinks was
correct.
His book, which I thought was great. Then on the local level, I was honored to work at Channel 6 early in my career, get a job here and move here. Legendary station, legendary people. Bob Gamble, the news director there, he's in Broadcast Hall of Fame. He's passed away a few years ago. Wonderful guy and hardcore journalist with a soft heart. I mean, he was just a great guy and someone I looked up to. Howard Caldwell, Clyde Lee, the anchor desk, the things that Channel 6 did over the years were truly phenomenal on a local level, and really solid reporters like, Jack Reinhardt and Derek Thomas and Cy Jenkins. I mean, I can go on down the list, but Channel 6, and there were others in this market certainly, but Channel 6 will always have a really great place in my heart for the things that it enabled me to do, but also for all the things that have been accomplished at that station over the years.
I should note that Howard Caldwell is a fellow graduate of Howe High School on the
Very
east
good.
side.
Yes.
Along with Fred Klipsch.
I didn't know that. Okay. Very good. Well, Howard, and again, great example of a person who on TV, I think he came across certainly as a credible journalist, but also a nice guy and a good guy, and a great example of someone who indeed was that. Some people come across as nice guys that maybe aren't nice guys, or vice versa. Howard was the same guy, I think, in person as he was over the air. And he was a very special guy.
So many of these long tenured reporters or anchors have retired in the last 5 or 6 years, I would say. Jack Reinhardt, Rich Van Wyk.
Just retired, yeah.
Jim Shella.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Rader. The list goes on. Does it make you a little bit wistful to see some of these folks step away?
A little bit, but you know what? And I'm a firm believer that you need new blood. You need young people to step in the fold and take the ball and run with it. So I like to see new folks in high profile positions. However, what is striking to me is, and you mentioned some great names there, and there are others as well, is the lack of institutional knowledge in media in Indianapolis. And I would assume it's very similar around the country, in markets around the country. But, when to use the Channel 6 analogy, when I was back at Channel 6, you had so many people there who had been there for a number of years. And if there was a story, you had to hearken back. Oh, yeah, that was 2 years ago. What was that? They would be able to tell you, this is what happened. This is why it is important. This is why it's important now. And you had that institutional knowledge. So if something happens, you can call back, you can call back on that knowledge, and it really gives you depth and context to a story that really, I just don't think it exists hardly at all now. You mentioned Rich Van Wyk from 13. He's one of the last of the breed, I think. I don't know how many, there are a few, I guess, but not many who've been around for that length of time who are really encyclopedias of information and can understand why a story is important. Sometimes something might happen, and if folks haven't been around for a while, they don't take note. They just move on to the next story. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think we're just losing that institutional knowledge in media.
And I think Rich only worked at 13.
He did.
For 40 years, 40 plus years.
That's a long time. Went there as an intern and then got the opportunity. And that knowledge is something that I think is so important. And especially in a city like Indianapolis, you see all the changes that have happened here in the last, beyond that, but even we arrived here in 83. So what is that? Almost 40 years. And to see what has happened downtown and the history and the context of of downtown development, of the amateur sports movement, now of technology and innovation and all those things. I think it's important to have that knowledge to provide context for the stories that we read and see every day.
And another name we must mention, who you worked with, is Barbara Boyd.
Of course, the legend, another Hall of Famer.
I'd love to have her on the podcast. I'm actually trying to get Barbara Boyd and T. Garrett Benjamin, a Channel 6 alum.
Yeah.
On at the same time together.
That would be great. And Barbara, again, you talk about a trailblazer as an African-American woman being on TV in Indianapolis. And this was long before I arrived in Indianapolis, but I think she received awards for her. She had breast cancer and did, I think, a series of stories, of reports and to think about it at that time, which was, probably 50 years ago, that just didn't happen. And she was open to it and did it. And she again, another special person that has made such an impact in so many ways on Indianapolis. She'd be a great one. And I haven't seen her for a little while, but she seems to have as much energy today as she did 20 years ago. And I think
she looks ridiculous. She looks absolutely stunning.
I know. Doesn't age.
She's 90 something, isn't she? Isn't she like 90?
Yeah, doesn't age.
Well, you have your Business and Beyond podcast, but you can't have Barbara Boyd on before I do.
I'll let you. Okay, I'll go second with her, but she's a great one. Yeah.
Can you remember or recall one or two stories you covered that have stuck with you?
A couple, and
during your time at Channel 6 as well.
Yeah, and it's I guess germane now to what we see happening on the border, but probably 92 or 93, we Channel 6. I had the idea to do this. There was a lot of attention being put on the automakers, U.S. automakers, GM, Ford, Chrysler, sending a lot of their work to Mexico. And, literally built plants right along the border in Mexico to manufacture there and then come back. So we actually traveled to Juarez, Mexico. Thompson Consumer Electronics at the time had a big plant down there, and also went down to Texas where General Motors, Delco Electronics had a big Matamoros, Mexico, I believe, was where they had a big plant. So we did a series of reports, got an Emmy nomination, didn't win the Emmy, but I thought they were pretty good. That stuck with me for sure. And to really get into, how big business with Indiana connections, how they fits into the global marketplace, how they impact families and individuals in a big way. So that was one. The other one that I'll always remember is when the Colts came to Indianapolis, which was a fascinating time. And there was of course, for weeks, the rumors that the Colts may come to Indianapolis, may or may not come. There was the negotiations back and forth, much of it so secretive. You had at the time, the Hoosier Dome was built, no team there. With blue seats, ironically for the Colts. But I just remember vividly being live on the air. And it seems to me it was like at noon or late morning or noon when the Colts and the city of Indianapolis had an event for fans to come and the community to come. And that's the iconic picture of Bill Hudnut and Bob Irsay walking in to the stadium, the Hoosier Dome. And I remember thinking to myself as I was covering that, I said, you know what? This is something that is going to have an impact on this city for many, many years to come. And I think that's certainly the case. It's been a catalyst for any number of things that have happened downtown. But I'd say those are two of the stories that I really remember vividly.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends, LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today on the podcast is Gerry Dick, host of Inside Indiana Business and host of the Business and Beyond podcast, which you should definitely take a listen to. He has some terrific guests. So I'm going to ask you another unfair question.
Yeah.
Is there a particular Hoosier leader and or legend you especially admire?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because there are certainly, a lot of them. And again, I'd hearken back to comment I made earlier. I mean, one would certainly be Mitch Daniels, because, and I always remember he made the comment, and he's probably made it many times, but I remember hearing him say one time when he's talking about making a decision, he hearkened back to his high school or his little league baseball coach. He said, if you're going to make an error, you want to make an error charging the ball. You want to charge the ball. You don't want to be back on your heels. And I think I look at the things that he did as governor, things like daylight saving time, and there were some other, issues, the toll road lease and some of the other things that at the time you could say they were controversial. I mean, there were people who certainly raised a lot of cane about that. And
as communications director at the Indiana Republican Party at the time,
so you're well aware.
Very aware.
Yeah. And he's taken that attitude. And again, that not that there isn't a fear of failure, but kind of throwing that aside to get things done and to make things happen. And you look at some of the things that he's done at Purdue, and lots of places are freezing tuition, but how many were 7, 8, 9, however many years it's been, how many years, how many people were doing it back then, the whole COVID, the reaction to COVID. And I think Purdue and Mitch were out on an island early on saying, we're going to get kids back to school. And that wasn't a popular necessarily opinion, but it certainly worked out. So I would point to him. I would throw a couple of Scotts in there, and that's Scott Jones, my partner in the business, and some of the things he did, helping from the private sector side on daylight saving time and getting innovation and entrepreneurship more in the spotlight in Indiana. Scott Dorsey, one of the co-founders of Exact Target, again, giving back to community now, helping other companies and other startups maybe get that spark to launch their idea and to create things. So there are a lot of people, I tell you. Well, and an obvious one is Jim Morris, who everybody knows, everyone's been touched by in some way over the many years. But Jim's so many of his roles, whether it was at the endowment or the water company, the World Food Program, obviously at the Pacers now, you could go on down the list. But his influence on so many important things in our state that impact's going to last many lifetimes into the future. So I'd put Jim certainly up there at or near the top of the list as well.
How would you rate Indianapolis's or Indiana's entrepreneurial class spirit in the funds available, the opportunities that are available for people? Is it a hell of a lot better than it used to be, but still needs to be better? Or, relative to our competitors, we're doing pretty darn well?
Yeah, I would say the former. I'd say better, no question about it. And I just look back at, say, the last 20 years and what has transpired over the course of that time. Actually, if you go back to the marker for me is 1998. That's when Steve Goldsmith was mayor, and he created this high-tech task force, group of local business community leaders who got together, and they visited all these markets around the country. San Francisco, Austin, Boston, these tech-rich communities, to find out what they did to create a tech-based economy, what Indianapolis needs to do to do the same. So that's 1998. If you look back then, some of the big things that were talked about were not connected, no connectivity. There are no direct flights. You can't get there from here or get here from there. Venture capital people in California didn't want to burn 2 days just to travel out here to look at companies. That has changed in a huge way. Daylight saving time, again, being connected to other parts of the country. That's changed. A lot of people didn't think that would ever happen. The venture capital piece, which is so important, that fuel to fund companies and startups and ideas, it's better, but it needs to get even better. And I mentioned Scott Dorsey with High Alpha. He and a couple other co-founders started Exact Target, sold it for $2.5 billion. He could have gone to the beach and just started drinking Mai Tais and put his feet up and relaxed. But he and others created High Alpha, which is focused on creating that next generation software company, and also a fund to help these companies with promising ideas with money. So again, so many things you can point to that are positive. Indiana has always been a state. It's a Midwestern thing, I think, but Indiana, we don't brag on ourselves very much. Oh, shucks, it's not that big a deal. We need to do more of that, in my opinion, to talk about what we have here and the assets and the really positive things, because there are a lot of things. These incubators and co-working spaces. Launch Fishers is a great example up in the city of Fishers, which has this vision of being an entrepreneurial, smart, innovative city. And that's kind of their brand, if you will. So you're seeing a lot of things all over the state of Indiana, in particular in central Indiana, that are positive. But especially on that venture capital game, we gotta up that game. And the other piece, Robert, I would say, as you know as well, is talent. We've got incredible colleges and universities. We're keeping more of that talent here. We need to keep more of it, because to fuel the jobs and the demand that's going to be out there for jobs for these companies in the years ahead, we got to keep more people here and attract people to the state of Indiana.
You mentioned talent and the entrepreneurial spirit and the innovation. You just recently had on your podcast someone who I consider a terrific friend and probably the most talented leader of his generation, because he's a few years younger than me. I don't know, 10 or 12, I'm not sure. Ryan Vaughn. We need more Ryan Vaughns, and we need more Angela Smith-Jones, and the list goes on and on. And then with regard to innovation, and I should say full disclosure, they have been my client from time to time. Talk about what Dan Elsner has done at Marion.
Oh, amazing, to put it mildly. And you talk about innovation and education. You looked that up in the dictionary. You got Dan's picture there. Education, is one of those areas that you don't necessarily associate with innovation and things being done differently and in new ways. But you just look at what has happened at Marion University, formerly Marion College. So that's one of the many changes Dan made there to make it Marion University. But creating the School of Medicine, chiropractic medicine, or osteopathic medicine. Another a medical school, establishing football. You talk about talent and talk about the need to get students and a diverse group of students into the university. People said, what are you creating a football program for crying out loud? Getting more on-campus housing. All the things they did there, it's like an innovation a minute. So he has, without question, transformed Marion University. But I think his innovation, now what they're doing with St. Joseph's College, which of course went out of business in Rensselaer, but doing some statewide things there. His innovation, I think, is rubbing off to other schools, large and small, to do things out of the box, outside of the box, if you will. And I think that's a good thing. And again, from a talent pipeline perspective, can't remember what the numbers are, but there's like 90%, whatever the number is, the number of graduates from Marion University who stay in central Indiana or stay in Indiana. When you look at teachers, you look at healthcare professionals, and those industries need more talent, more people. Marion is a pipeline to fill those needs. So Dan, again, you talk about innovators in education. Mitch Daniels has certainly become that as he's gone to Purdue, but Dan Elsner has just done and continues to do an amazing job at Marion.
Well, I know President Elsner and President Sue Ellspermann for Ivy Tech were just on your Inside Indiana business show about a month ago talking about their new education alliance. When you talk to business owners or people who are decision makers at the highest level, how much do they emphasize the general education climate in Indiana while also giving credit where credit is due with regard to the education reform, quality education environment in Indiana, in Indianapolis? How important is that?
Well, they talk about a lot. It's very important, obviously. And you mentioned Sue Ellspermann at Ivy Tech. I think that's a great example. The word alignment is used a lot, of aligning the needs of business with the curriculum and the education that students are receiving in colleges and universities. I think if you talk to folks in business, if you talk to folks in academia, I think who are being honest, I think they'd say those two things have been out of whack for a long time. And there's not been enough focus on really educating students to the demands or to what the open jobs are in a 21st century economy. Technical education, what used to be called vocational education, if you will, the things that Ivy Tech is doing. If you think about the educational pipeline, and former CEO of Salesforce Marketing Cloud, who was here for a number of years, he's been all over the country, lived out in Silicon Valley for a while, and he would openly say there is no better pipeline for talent than in Indiana, bar none. He said, hands down, if you look at the state universities and the elite universities in that list, you look at the private universities and the elite universities in that list, it's unbelievable. What kind of academic firepower there is here. So the challenge is to connect the universities with the needs of business. I think you're seeing a lot of examples around the state of Indiana of that happening. And I think there's getting more, 4-year traditional colleges, universities, very important. Obviously, their importance continues to be, a front burner thing. But then you look at the technical education and, the types of jobs, and you look at what Ivy Tech is doing, where kids can come out of high school with an associate's degree. They're leaving high school with a college associate's degree, and they can go right into the workplace, the workforce, and get these stackable degrees to begin their career. So in terms of not leaving high school with no job opportunities, they're not going to go, perhaps they're not cut out, they're not made to, and don't have interest in going to a traditional 4-year college. They can come out with skills that can get them a good paying job with benefits and launch them on a career. There's a lot of that going on as well. So I think the education piece, and Teresa Lovers at the Commission for Higher Education and her team and others I know are so engaged and involved in this. And it gets back to the talent equation. So they're on a quest now. And sometimes I forget, I think it's the goal is to have 2/3 of the state of Indiana, 2/3 of the population with an education beyond high school that includes either a 4-year degree, associate's degree, or a legitimate credential. And we're not there yet, but the goal is to get there. And again, it's about filling that talent pipeline and growing the economy. And I think the other thing I'd throw out on that, Robert, is Indianapolis, Central Indiana has largely done pretty well. Sometimes better than others, but done pretty well. It's got a lot going on. The challenge is, I think, is for the rest of Indiana. You see places like Fort Wayne with their downtown development and some of the investment you're seeing there. Evansville, the IU Med Center downtown in Evansville, and some other places. But rural Indiana, and gets into internet connectivity and all kinds of things. But I have a concern about the economy in the rest of Indiana outside of Central Indiana, and that coming together where we're seeing more jobs and investment and that kind of thing.
It was a little more than 20 years ago that you started your business. And I think it's fair to say the flagship aspect of your business is the show Inside Indiana Business. You've been grateful and had me on a few times and have accepted my pitches for my clients to come on there. how did you manage? And I'm going to say this, and I believe it, and it's a compliment to you and your staff, whether that's Tara or TWD or everybody there who's Andrea, who's worked there, Tracy. You've always had such a terrific group of people. Joe, how have you managed to create this destination media centerpiece? Because that's what it is.
Well, and you mentioned the most important piece of the equation, and that's talent. And the people who have worked, who do work for me, are talented people committed to our mission and what we're doing. So that would be certainly number one. But I look back on it and I think about it. Because I was at Channel 6, I enjoyed what I was doing, but I really felt as though I didn't want to wake up. Fast forward 20 years from that time and wake up and decide I didn't want to be a reporter or got fired or whatever the case might be and not have any options. And I really began thinking, what do I want to do? And trying to think, okay, what do I know? And I know media and a bit about business. And I got a lot of the stories I did at Channel 6 were economic development and whether it's Circle Center Mall and the development communities we're doing. I got around the state. So that's how it came up. And I looked at what was happening in media, especially when it comes to local content, business news. You could see nationally, you could get a business news, 100 different places on cable, all kinds of places you could get national business news. But where do you go to get local content? And certainly newspapers were, beginning to not really cover it, that much. TV has never really done a great job of covering local business news. So that's how I came up with the idea for the show. And I really felt as though if we could get it on the air, it could work. And fortunately it did. And then, connected with Scott Jones. I went to pitch him on a technology sponsorship on the show. He thought the show was great. He said, but can you create something bigger, really create it on a statewide basis. And so that's really 2 years after we launched in 98. So 2000 is when we formed the company, but the whole idea was we expanded the show. People thought I was absolutely crazy from 30 minutes to an hour and created a statewide entity. So we would cover news, not just here in Indy, but Fort Wayne and, South Bend, whatever the case might be. And then really leverage technology. We talked about technology earlier and the platform and getting content to people when they want it, where they want it, how they want it. So that's ultimately not only a website, but e-newsletters. And I mean, at that time in 2000, people were still faxing things. And but we got into that game on radio, which we still have today. And that's really not only from a content distribution standpoint, but from a branding standpoint, and to get that inside Indiana business name in front of people. That's how it really kind of took off. And again, been very fortunate to have just tremendous people to work for me and to support what we do along the way.
Do you miss the adrenaline of the breaking news? But it's more than compensated by the fact that you get to do these really terrific set piece interviews with folks where you can have a nice, casual, but informative conversation. Mm-hmm. Is there a balance there?
Yeah, there is. And I will say this. I mean, that breaking news fix, if you will, we get a little bit of that when it's, we get, Toyota's big announcement, 600 million or nearly $1 billion investment, these big economic development projects that we get the scoop on, and we're kind of, can break that news. That kind of solves that a little bit, but more broadly, it gives us the opportunity. And as I've always said, in terms of our content, we're not in business to be cheerleaders for the business community, but at the same time, we do want Indiana business to be successful. And so the stories we do, we're going to do the stories on the layoffs and the plant closings and the challenges in education and those types of things. But we're going to do many of the stories we do are about what people are doing in Indiana and innovation and entrepreneurship. If I get one comment most consistently, and it's the one I appreciate among the most, that is, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was happening in Indiana. And there's a lot of that all over the state as you look at what entrepreneurs are doing and innovators and small business owners. So that's really, and I think that's part of what has led to our success as well, because the local stations don't have the time for it, don't have the interest in doing it. So we're able to do that. And I think there's an appetite for it.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. We're talking with native Hoosier, entrepreneur, and journalist, Gerry Dick. Let's talk just for a few minutes about your podcast. It's called Business and Beyond. The lineup of guests is terrific, to say the least. I look at some of them and go, okay, they've been on mine too. Or like, damn, how did he get them? What made you start the podcast? I know I hate to say it's the trendy type thing, but they are becoming enormously popular. Talk to us a little bit about why you decided to go down that route and how much fun you're having. Because if you listen to the podcast, you're having fun.
Yeah, and it's great question. And you're fully aware of this, and you jumped on the podcast bandwagon before I did. And I just I'm really late to the game. I think it's a popular vehicle to get content to people. And frankly, and I guess I was asleep, but I just didn't realize how popular. We started a podcast where we take our 1 hour TV show and we condense it into basically 30 minutes. And you have people who download that and listen to that. We get feedback that, on the way to work or working out on the treadmill, whatever the case might be, I listen to the show on a podcast. But I really, truly didn't know the real impact and where this podcasting thing was going. So that's really what prompted it. I said, we need to be a part of that. And so the idea of Business and Beyond, as it suggests, they're business people, but people of all walks of life. And it's about their path to, where they're going, how they've gotten to where they are, where they grew up, those types of things. So it's business, entertainment, sports, whatever the case might be. We try to make it a conversation that is, again, with people that folks may be aware of, maybe they aren't aware of. I know we just did one that'll be out, I think maybe next week, with Bo Borowski, who's an NCAA official. He's Indianapolis guy, grew up here. A really interesting story. But if you look, if you're a basketball fan and you see the guy, you'd know who he is, because he does 3 to 4 games a week, Big Ten, ACC, Big East. He's one of the most visible NCAA officials out there, has done 2 Final Fours, the last 2 Final Fours. So again, he's a good example. It's kind of a sports guy, but a life story we like to get into. So it's been fun. I enjoy our interviews on TV, but this, as you know, Robert, gives you an extended platform to just have a conversation, and that's been fun.
Have you learned anything new? Like, you've been in the city for decades and have interviewed either through Inside Indiana Business or at Channel 6. Hundreds, maybe probably at this point, thousands of people for sure. So you have a very rich knowledge of this city and its people and its leaders and its fun kind of trivia, for lack of a better term. Is there anything that sticks out through your podcast or interview? You're like, you mentioned something about the audience going, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, when has Gerry Dick said, I didn't know that?
Well, it's interesting because I know a lot of the kind of history, at least for the last, 40 years plus or so. But it's some of the kind of the backstories that I find really interesting. Scott Dorsey, for example, that I mentioned earlier, and he's just one good example. He talked about when they went to close on the exact target, the Salesforce acquisition, $2.5 billion. Big deal. And he tells the story about taking 2 pictures when they were ready to sign and close the deal. One picture was of him smiling and happy and excited and, gung-ho, this is a great day. The other picture was him looking really terrified, scared, frightened, not knowing. And at the time they said, you know what? we're going to take these two pictures. We're going to see which one turns out to be what this deal ultimately is. Obviously, the good picture is the one that prevailed. But it's stories like that, kind of the backstories that individuals have. Their times of doubt, maybe as they pursued their business ideas or things they were doing in their lifetimes. Those are the things that you don't know until you really sit down and talk to someone. And those are the things I really appreciate.
We have reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all our guests. Gerry Dick, are you ready?
Ready to go.
What was your first job?
After college or first job period?
First job period. You can leave out cutting grass or delivering newspapers, but
yeah, I would tell you the first real job, because I detasseled corn, I baled hay, cut weeds in bean fields. I did the farm stuff, but I pressed records at CBS, the CBS Records Factory in Terre Haute, Indiana, midnight to 8 shift for 2 summers. And it was interesting. It was the largest record pressing operation in the world. It was in Terre Haute, Indiana, CBS Records. And had a summer job there, 2 summers in a row, made great money, but it was a grind. Did a lot of Peter Frampton albums. So yeah, that was me.
Frampton Comes Alive.
Exactly.
That could have been the name of your podcast.
Yeah.
Gary Comes Alive.
I like that. Maybe I would do another one. Yeah.
I think my wages are still being garnished for all the CD memberships back in the 80s.
For Columbia House.
House. Question number 2. What was your first concert?
First concert, Kiss, Holman Center, Terre Haute.
Gerry Dick, member of the Kiss Army.
No, I was not, but I think the Kiss Army was founded in Terre Haute, if I'm not mistaken.
Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you choose?
Oh boy. Oh man. Oh man, you know what? And I'll tell you, this probably says a lot about me, but I don't have time to read that many books anymore. But I would say, oh gosh, I'll go back to when I was really young, and I just remember this book, Gale Sayers, I Am Third. It was about his relationship with Brian Piccolo and that whole thing. This goes back into the 60s, but it was a book about a young guy's path to success, empathy, and caring for other people and that kind of thing. So I'll throw that one out there.
Gary's referencing Gary Piccolo, or excuse me,
Brian Piccolo,
Piccolo, who was from Wake Forest and roomed with Gale Sayers for the Chicago Bears. And he died at the age of like 23, 24.
Something like that.
And created, and it was memorialized in the film Brian's Song, which is still used to induce crying in men in sociology and psychology classes to this day.
No question. And back then, and certainly when they were in training camp at that time, the Bears trained at St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer.
Question number 4. If you could witness any event in history, be there as it happens, which event would you choose?
Wow. Well, these are tough ones. Any event in history. Well, I've done. Any event in history. Boy, I'm not prepared for that one. I'm fascinated by World War II. I wouldn't have want to have witnessed D-Day, but it just fascinates me in terms of events in history and what took place then. We've been able to go over, been in Normandy and seen some things over there. But, if it's if I switch it to my fallback on sports, I've been to the Masters, so I've seen that. So that's off my bucket list. I tell you what's on my bucket list is the Army Navy game. Is what I want to witness.
Go Army.
That's right.
Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, whom would you choose?
Oh, another good one. Just one person?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I would, a guy who has had certainly an interesting life. Well, I'm going to do a local and a national, but George W. Bush. I just think his perspective on a number of things and what he has been through in his life, politics, personally, all those types of things. I think George W. Bush would be a really interesting dinner conversation. And then I'll say, look, if I had a local person, and I'll go back, even though I've talked to him many times and know a lot about him, is Jim Morris, because I think the stories and the things that he has done in his life, I'd love to know more about that, about those things.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest has been entrepreneur, journalist, and proud Hoosier, Gerry Dick. Gerry, thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed it.
Hey, I really enjoyed it, Robert, very much, and I look forward to seeing you around town. Now that all these restrictions are maybe off, hope to see you in person very soon.
Thank you, sir, very much. Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.